have some idea that I'm not to swear anymore. This evening's Dharma talk is titled Anger Management. Bet you get a few hits. So first I will show you what I'm going to talk about. I will show you, and then I will tell you what I showed you. Is that the right order? And then, yeah, I'm going to show you what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm going to tell you about what I just showed you. So first I'm going to show you anger. You ready? How was that? Now I'm going to manage that.
Could you do that again?
I know I overdid it. So anger quite often feels like that. Maybe you don't express it that way, but the way anger arises is once it gets that intense, you're pretty much done for. You can't manage that. You can't manage something that is already on the way. Like the ship has sailed, the rocks are falling, you've jumped out with no parachute. So you can't really manage that. It's already has its momentum. So if that occurs, don't do anything about it. I would even say be angry. Try to keep your gun in your holster, of course. But just actually feel the anger that's arising. Take that opportunity as a what we call in this tradition a dharma gate. And it's a pretty intense one. And of course I'm being silly because I'm trying to get your attention. But then the other part of that is the management part, which first of all I like to say you can't really manage anger, not to run totally against what other people might be trying to say or do. You can't really manage that because once it has started to erupt, it's circular. It's going to find some way to flood the consciousness. Because the consciousness has not been prioritized. What's been prioritized is the anger because of our reactivity. So what I would say is this part of it, this making a big noise and getting upset and throwing things and throwing a couch across the room. You haven't done that, have you? I guess I'm the only one that's thrown the couch across the room. It seems to be necessary to increase, I don't know if it's actually increased, but to prioritize the space in which the anger would eventually occur. So get to know yourself really well. Sit down, hold still when you're not angry, and train the mind to open up. Train the mind to just see what arises. Practice on the little things. Practice on the little skirmishes. You think you don't have little skirmishes? Look closely. Because eventually you'll be able to see where that actually arises from. It's like a little bit of friction, as much between two fingers rubbing together like that. That kind of heat, eventually, like a spark in a dry woods, will catch hold. So that's where we have to see it at. Have to see it at the initial beginning, where it actually starts at. Even that's not even where it starts at. It's actually prior to that. But we have to get what we can. We have to use the phenomena. We have to use the actual heat of the situation first. Once we see that, then there's a possibility of going deeper. And it might not be going backwards like it may look into some kind of past. At some at some point we begin to see that the whole idea of past and future is not as true as it may look. So pretty hard to manage it. I'm not saying there aren't techniques, maybe psychologists, maybe behavioral therapists of different stripes, cognitive behavioral techniques and so on, might not be able to work with your particular issue. But there's a good possibility, there's a good possibility that approaching it as actually materializing it and making it into something that is wrong, that has to be fixed, is a misunderstanding. You aren't going to be able to fix that kind of situation fundamentally. You might be able to fix it for 3 years, 8 years, for a while. You might be able to manage it for a while, but everything, including who you are, your very so-called discontinuous identity, is fluctuating and interacting with everything else all the time. In order to relate to that fundamentally, directly, and radically, it seems to be necessary to go down into that with our awareness without looking for anything. If you start to search, that's a misunderstanding. Searching is going out towards things. So you might have to search a little bit. You got to search to find a teaching. You have to search to find a teacher, a sangha, a wall to look at, an instruction that says sit down, hold still, and watch what your mind does. There are lots of different ways of saying this, lots of different ways of teaching it. Right and wrong is beside the point. For some people, what I'm talking about will work. Others, this is not going to work. You're going to have to need another teacher, another kind of practice. But if this resonates with you, then probably you could look at that or heed, or at least don't turn away from that resonance. And so when I did that little demonstration, I actually was mad. I can't do that. I'm not an actor. So I actually, in order to do that, I get mad. But it doesn't take over. And it's interesting that once you understand how that works, every emotion is available to you, because there's no longer someone who is having it. There's no longer an identity that has that emotion. Looking for some kind of success around this is just like turning away from the very exercise that you need to be doing. If you start to look for results, the way this situation works is it works with cause and effect up to a certain point, and then at some point the cause and effect part starts to spread out so that you don't separate one from the other. You don't separate the cause from the effect. Pardon me. So it seems to be necessary when, as a meditator, you have to have an awareness practice going on for this to work in this way. It seems to be necessary to actually, when anger comes up, to not shut down on it and try to manipulate or control yourself, or try to not be angry. As I said, it's good to keep your gun in the holster. I'm not saying you need to act out of that, but there needs to be a way that you can actually completely feel those emotions go through you without, as I sometimes say, without hooking up your vocal cords or your musculature to do anything about it, but to actually feel it so that it doesn't even show on your face. This does not mean you're turning away from it. You're working with it. The conventional term for this in Buddhism is upaya, skillful means, is to understand the energy of that so completely that you actually are able to allow it to come in. It's like something looking for somebody in an empty house. There's no one there but consciousness. There's no entity, no being there. If you congeal into a being, you're going to have trouble. I'm not threatening you with anything. I'm just saying that you don't have to do that. You don't have to solidify yourself into anything. You can actually live in an open dimension where there is no reference point. get your reference points from the world. Trungpa Rinpoche once said, and I have to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly what he said. Someone asked him whatever happened to his teacher, his guru, or something like that. He says, situations are my teacher, and that's how it is. It's whatever's happening. You don't join it, you don't separate from it, and you certainly don't ignore it. And then if there's any part in that situation for you, it'll become obvious. That's how I know what to do when I come up here and sit, and I know how to do this, or something knows how to do it. When I go do something else, I do something else. Then I may show up as a teacher, and I may show up as just somebody else sitting on the train.
How can you observe your anger without it expressing and without you holding it down? So
I think that once the anger starts cranking up, as we've talked about before, once it gets what the metaphor would be, a foothold or some kind of purchase on your apparent identity, your imputed, your believed in identity of me. Oh my, I'm going to get angry, or you might not even have time to do that. It's just the identity situation is already locked down. You're not in the room. You've shut off all your other senses. We talked a little bit about somebody who is really irritated by noise. There's lots of intense noise that can make you angry, like a crying child or something like that. Put something in your ears. Wear earplugs so you don't have quite so much intensity. That's not cheating. You're just cutting back on the input. But don't necessarily go into something like, well, I should just be able to do this. No. You need earmuffs. Maybe. Or if it's another kind of situation where you're trying to make yourself put up with a situation that's frustrating, leave. Excuse yourself and leave. Go outside, blow your stack. Nobody's smiling at that, so I have to say that differently. Go outside and blow your stack. That worked better that time. Now, what am I saying? I'm not saying just discharge emotion. That's a misunderstanding. That being said, if that tsunami has gotten a hold of you, that might be the only, it may be choiceless. You might just have to blow your stack. You may do that. But don't immediately go from anger. There's the 3 poisons. They're very important. It's so simple, very important. When the anger comes up, do not rush right into passion or the other end of pride, where you feel ashamed that you lost your temper. There isn't anyone. If you think there's somebody there, then you're going to protect them with apologies. I'm not saying you shouldn't say, whoops, sorry. Try not to do that again. But if you apologize more than once, you apologize twice, that's self-centeredness. You're trying to get off the hook. If you apologize once, then you really probably mean that. Whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry I did that. But any kind of elaboration on that is you might as well be tying your self-centeredness, the illusion of a self, in knots and crystallizing it into some solid self that's done something wrong. There isn't anyone. This doesn't mean that you can't be responsible for something or have the ability to respond directly, genuinely, sympathetically, even emotionally, and intuitively and subjectively and all the other fancy words to what's happening. Do it once. Just respond. And then don't keep on going looking for some kind of something to let you off the hook. That's the misunderstanding around apology and forgiveness. Forgiveness is, I don't like to go to this because I think sometimes there needs to be a little bit of that. But be very careful about forgiving anybody. Don't do anything with it. Just keep looking at it. Look at your resentment. Use it. Use it. Use it. Don't get rid of it. Don't try to not be resentful or try to forgive. That person doesn't need your forgiveness. Shodo.
You said when you had that expression, when you started, it was actual anger.
Yeah.
Was that anger without hatred?
I think I hated a couple people in here, but I'm not sure which ones they were. I could kind of feel it. Yeah, there's no hatred there. No, it's just having a temper tantrum.
I think sometimes it's talked about how there's like transmuted energies, or anger's flip side is clarity. And I'm just wondering,
What are you wondering about?
is anger without hatred clarity?
Mm-hmm. What else are you wondering about?
How is that expression clarity?
Because there's no hatred. We can't not get angry. We're going to get, you're a human being, you're here, you're a physical being. You're going to have irritations. I mean, what I was doing there was kind of over the top. But it's pretty intense. It took me a minute to recover from it. I had to forgive myself for getting mad. More about that? Junshu,
Was there a cause of that anger that you expressed?
just now? Yes, to teach. I'm here to teach, or whatever life I have left. That's what I'm here to do. And what am I teaching? Find out who you are. It says in the last part of the Myth of Freedom by Chogyam Trungpa, you need the teacher so you can leave the teacher. Or maybe it says it somewhere else. But it says, oh no, it says in that one, it says the teacher may have to insult you. So I've come to insult you. Chazan.
While we're still in the process of training our minds, is it inevitable that anger is going to find ways to burst forth?
Is it what? Inevitable?
That the anger will find ways to burst forward?
I think it's different with each person. Some people don't really have a big kind of an anger problem. They might, the impatience never goes into anger. It kind of swirls around there, and it might go into ignorance. It might go into depression, or all the other names we have for various emotions. But some people go in different directions with that. Depends on if you have Mars in a fire sign or not. Just kidding. More?
When you talk about working with anger, you talk about how important it is to meditate.
I do.
And like the situation I was talking with you today about, there was at least some awareness of it building and some awareness of it being held down, and then the explosion.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a way to defuse that as you notice it building up.
Yeah. So stay in your sense fields, because that's where you're going to feel. You're going to feel it in your body. And if you try to, the anger comes from trying to get rid of the emotion. And what we do, it's like blaming somebody. If something happens and we blame, and it does work a little bit, or we probably wouldn't do it. But I would say, in the situation that you're talking about, it probably needs to be worked with on the cushion, so that you can actually catch that little tiny hot spark that starts of discomfort. That's why meditation is quite often called voluntary dissatisfaction or voluntary discomfort. We're volunteering to come in and sit down and see the way we keep objecting to things, the way we keep looking for something else, or looking for some kind of a palliative to help us to feel better, help us to feel more awake, more enlightened, more peaceful, and so on. More.
It seems like it's easy to think that if we work with our minds, that anger won't show up, but you often say that anger doesn't go anywhere. So what changes so that doesn't become an expression of your confusion?
You stop objecting to your confusion. You stop objecting to your anger. You really just stop objecting to everything. But not that you agree with everything. You just don't take a position. And the anger, if you make a little cartoon out of it, the anger is like running into the house and looking for someone that'll say that'll feel that way. So the anger is it doesn't have an expression. consciousness doesn't belong to anyone, but when there's a body form, the six sense fields and their objects, or the five skandhas, or however you want to describe the existence of the human form, the consciousness will look for identity. It's like when they say, they talk about the five skandhas: form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, or memory and consciousness. That when those are there, when they link up, they tend to create some kind of a being who can win or lose, get mad or be happy, and buy into that kind of polarity that is dependently arisen and is dependent on dependent origination, dependent on causes and conditions that are unsearchable. You can't find the first cause for anything. Everything is multiple. And so this is why, if you can see that there is no solid being, then it seems like form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, they still function, but form doesn't hook up with feeling. Feeling doesn't hook up with concepts. Just feeling. Just feeling. You can actually just feel without any hookup to anything else. No justification, no validation. You can just perceive. This is what the Yogacara teachings are talking about when they talk about, what do they talk about? Perception only. No perceiver. It doesn't look like this, but I'm just using it. No perceiver and no object, just perception. Transcendentally blind. That's not true. Yes.
What's going on in the conceptual mind when it's not hooking up with the rest of the skandhas?
It just might be randomly naming and calling out stuff. You hear it. There's nothing to get rid of. You don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to fix anything. Just see that there's no solid being here. There's no solid being here. There's no, if I'm looking at you and I see you, but I don't see anything but this. And if I look back this way, I also don't see anything but this. And they're not separate. The understanding is just transcends all of the polarities and all the concepts and all the ideas and all the grasping, fixation. All the warfare is no longer can get any fuel from anything. It gets its fuel from passion, aggression, and ignorance, mainly ignorance. Junchu.
Sanho has a question. He
Yes.
asks, or he says, Joko Beck said not to express anger because expressing anger is self-centered. Can you say a little about not expressing anger?
Yeah. Well, don't express it then. So Charlotte Joko Beck was a great Buddhist monk who passed away some time ago. Great teacher. People have different ways of talk. I would say, don't express anger, but on the other hand, don't turn away from the anger. Feel the anger. The expression of anger can happen without the vocal cords, without the musculature, and without the facial apparatus moving. But it takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of observing to see the way that keeps hooking up to something. If you try to be a person who doesn't get angry, then you've got an identity of someone who doesn't get angry. And then it builds up. So I'm not going to disagree with her. She's a much greater teacher than I am. She had thousands and thousands of students, and she's very, very inspirational. I heard her speak once. I can't remember what she said, but she was pretty cool. Is that all that Sanho had? It was a Sanho, right?
Mm-hmm. So far.
So again, I would go back and say, if you can not get angry, of course, but sometimes you can't help it. You can't help but do that. So turn that when that comes out. Don't try to put a lid on it and jump immediately into passion or ignorance. Actually, be responsible. Respond to the anger. I mean, someone else next to you might be upset because you don't look like you're sorry enough. But this is your practice. It's not the world's practice. It's yours. You need to do it. Someone's taking your inventory right next to you. Depends on who it is. If it's your life mate or someone intimate, they better start understanding who they're living with. In the Dharma Sangha, we don't lean on each other. And if we do, just be aware that you're leaning on someone for something else. Go ahead.
To use the the way that Sanha brought that up with was it the anger was self-centered? Is any other expression like on the other end, like something like laughing, is that still an expression of self-centeredness?
I don't think to say that it, that couldn't be. It could, laughing at someone, mocking someone, and making fun of somebody else's difficulty or something like that could have some kind of, glad that's not happening to me kind of thing, ha ha ha. So it could show up like that, but then there's different kinds of laughter, different kinds of anger. Yes?
You say that like the anger can come in, but it can't find anybody to be angry.
Yes.
And I'm thinking the same thing with like laughing. If they're finding someone who can laugh, is that a similar thing?
You think too much. Stop it. And now go ahead and think some more. Now, how's that feel?
Confusing.
Huh?
Confusing.
Confusion is good. Why do I say it's good? Because you have to, in order to really see what this says, you have to look at the confusion. Don't arbitrarily or prematurely, would be the fancy word of saying it, get rid of confusion. Confusion is the dharma. You have to look at the confusion. You have to actually, I'm not saying accept it or blame yourself or blame anything. Just look at if you look at the confusion long enough or intently enough, you begin to see the texture of the confusion instead of seeing what you've been calling it or what you've been attributing it to or all the ways that you might try to get away from it. It's just gunk. And actually, if you see it, this is what the Buddha saw, as I've said many times. Others have said the same thing. The Buddha didn't awaken to hobby horses and flowers and unicorns and rainbows, although I really like rainbows. What did he awaken to? He awoke to delusion, and he saw all of it. That was his awakening. He saw, felt, smelt, tasted, touched delusion deeply, thoroughly, so that the being who was imputing some kind of separation vanished into the delusion, was seen to be unreal, unreal, unreal. What is real? Find out. Well, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. Yeah, I'll take a chance. Not separate. Well, that's kind of too simple, though, isn't it? That's too easy. Here, this will help. Junchu.
Don from Virginia asks.
Who?
Don.
Oh, Don.
From Virginia.
Okay.
If we have bare awareness of the separated skandhas, what else do we do other than observe them?
Can you read that again? I was thinking about something else.
If we have bare awareness of the separated skandhas, what else do we do other than observe them?
You won't know they're separated. Did that answer his question? What else can we do? Probably not much. Any kind of credential is going to come apart. Any gaining idea of getting from here to there is going to collapse. Why? Because all compounded things are going down. All compounded things will vanish. This is just the Buddha's teaching, not something this old man's talking about. But it's true. Look at everything that arises goes away. Your most horrible depression, terrible feeling, especially if you don't do anything with it. If you fight it, it hangs around. But if you do nothing with it, it just, because of just the nature of impermanence, all compounded things, everything that comes together as something is going away.
Do stories that seem to arise spontaneously out of negative emotions signal some sort of warfare, fighting with the emotion?
It could. What do you do with that?
You observe it.
Yeah, don't do anything with it. Look at it, but don't chase it. Don't run away from it. Don't close off from it. Don't distract yourself. Stay with it. And even staying with it is a little bit too much push. Just don't do anything. Get the energy from that. You don't need any energy if you understand what the energy that's knocking at your door. Let it do the knocking. Isn't that a thing? Knocking through the yellow pages, they used to talk about that. Come on, correct me, go ahead, I dare you.
Edgar Allan Poe?
Nope, that's not it.
Let your fingers do the walking.
I knew I'd get somebody. It has to be somebody with gray hair, though, because we don't have yellow pages. Do we still have yellow pages?
Yeah. No white pages.
Huh?
No white pages.
No white pages?
Yeah. No
They're-
white pages.
they're gone?
Just yellow.
All right. Good. Glad we settled that. Yes, Andrew.
Can going into our senses when we feel anger be fighting with the anger?
Probably not, because something that's actually there is how your body feels. It's there all the time. We move the awareness to actually include how this feels, but to feel the anger in your whole sensorium, the whole situation, to feel the anger there. Then then the shutting down is probably going to be less. But that can be frightening. It can be painful. But you're actually going to feel the anger. I don't think you can do it if there's, as I was using the metaphor of a tsunami. I don't think if that's happening, if it's already underway and there's all this momentum, you probably aren't going to be able to do it. You're just going to have to experience however that arises. But the way we work with that situation is in the small form of that happens on the cushion, sitting down, holding still, and watching the way the mind works to object to things, fight with things, try to get rid of things, so that you can actually get very, very familiar with the way the mind is functioning on a small scale. So as it starts to ramp up in post-meditation or in our everyday life, you kind of see it coming. You get a sense. It's like I tell people who are that I teach meditation to people who don't necessarily have an interest in Buddhism but want to work with their addiction. That sitting practice of meditation, especially the way I'm teaching it, can help with that, because it strengthens the awareness so that you even though you have an addiction, you see the bad neighborhood coming before it gets to you. It's very similar with anger. You can kind of feel the bad neighborhood. You're starting to go towards that bad neighborhood. Now, sometimes because of your situation, like with a domestic situation where children are making a lot of racket or something, or the neighbors are running their chainsaw or something, where sometimes you can't just move your house. You can't just run away, so you might have to find a way to muffle that a little bit, or just be reasonable about it and stop trying to get a credential out of managing your anger. That's why the title of this is misleading. Can't manage anger. Jesse?
How does tolerance differ from awareness when strong emotions are flooding in?
How does tolerance
differ from awareness?
So, how are you using the word tolerance?
Like this idea of like distress tolerance, like the ability to feel what's coming your way and see it further along the process. And that's where, this idea of awareness also.
So, tolerance is a kind of a position you're taking on something where you're just kind of putting up with it. You have the ability to not object or agree or run away or to blame. Is that what you're saying? You're doing that as a strength, because if you're doing that as awareness, you're in for it. Because the just awareness means that you're not agreeing, objecting, shutting down, or anything, and so it could be painful. Whereas the tolerance part, an identity of someone who tolerates things, Sometimes we can do it out of that identity. And it depends on the karma that you come into this life with. Some people are just naturally easier going than others. Some people are totally impossible to relate with in any level. More?
Tolerance more as a descriptor, like I'm thinking, does the path prepare you or help you grow in an ability to
Yes. I think in a relative way it helps you to tolerate situations, to deal with your own impatience over things and to work with that and to bring awareness into that, you could say. There's a very relative situation that could go on for years that way. But the fundamental understanding actually leaps off the cliff. It leaves all the success and failure by the wayside. There isn't there's no accomplishment happening. There's no one that accomplished anything. But the path leading to that could have a lot of those qualities in it. A person gets less. One of the things if you start meditating yourself, others might notice that you listen better. You don't interrupt. You actually are listening. You seem to be more interested in what people are saying. There's a little bit more of I could call it indulging people a little bit more. You notice you're less likely to fly off the handle. On the other hand, if you get too proud of that or too starting to get a handle on this, I haven't lost my temper in 3 days. If you get a little bit too proud of your accomplishment, kind of like I'm a meditator, so other people aren't meditators, but I'm a meditator, so you guys should meditate. Anytime if you try to convince somebody else to meditate, very fishy. Mind your own business. People need to meditate. They'll find a way to do that. Unless you're sitting up here, which you may be, then you can say meditate. Darn it all. So did you have more on that? It's the tolerator mentality can work for a while. It's like the Hinayana Mahayana Vajrayana, the Hinayana Mahayana, or the Shravakayana, Pratyeka Bodhisattvayana. All those different structures are about more and more less me, and more everything else. Working with others, putting others before yourself. So you're really, somebody's having difficulty, even if they're giving you a lot of difficulty, you start to see that they're doing that because they're so miserable, and they're trying to, just like everyone's trying to get rid of their suffering and dump it on somebody else, right up to and including war between nations because of the leaders, trying to get rid of how we feel. So blame someone else, praise and blame. More?
no, thank you.
Other questions? Junshu.
Unyo has a question.
Unyo, that's my wife.
There seems to be a lot of undercurrent of anger in our politics. What is the best way to work with that?
Look at it and don't add. Don't look away from it. And if you do add, then just notice that you're adding to it. Notice that you're actually adding to the commotion. The very best way to work with everything out there is to start here. If you haven't made friends with this, you're going to have enemies. So make friends with this. So that the warfare, the internal skirmishes, the little tiny ones, and the big erupting kind of things, that situation, so that you've dealt with that here. And that way, because we're not separate, that way when you go out into the world, you actually see clearly why people function the way they do. Instead of seeing somebody who's crazy, and just blaming them or accusing them or getting upset with them, you see that it's because they're suffering. You actually can see deeply into their situation. You can see that they're miserable, and this is the way they get rid of it, is by creating chaos. So therefore I say, quite often say, you don't have to necessarily indulge and watch all the news media all over the place, but watch a little bit. See what's happening. Stay in touch with the so-called world out there. And of course, vote. No, I'm not going to tell you to vote for. Goes on.
You said, you might have to keep your gun in your holster if you're out and about and it's getting ugly.
Oh, I said keep your gun in your holster. Not you might have to.
Okay, so keep your gun in your
Yes.
holster.
Don't
So-
shoot anybody.
So, on the cushion,
Yeah.
should we ever take the attitude of keeping our gun in the holster?
Yes. Further question?
Not on that.
More?
You also said that you might have to go out and explode or have a temper tantrum. You know, remove yourself from the situation and blow your stack. Yeah, that's what you said.
I was endeavoring to be funny, but I noticed it didn't no one laughed, so yeah, didn't work.
So when that's the physical engagement has happened and you're blowing your stack, there's still a lot of adrenaline and chemicals in your
No
body that
kidding.
want you to keep. You know, it takes a while to dissipate.
Yeah, I know about that.
So, would it be okay to go for a walk or a ride or do something to kind of burn up that physically?
Sure. We'll have ice cream. That's what I would do. Sometimes I get mad just so I can have ice cream.
Isn't that a
Yeah.
habit?
Huh?
Isn't that forming a habit?
Well, that's kind of what you and Yokido were doing when you sent me that little picture of you grinning, looking at a bowl of ice cream when you knew I was fasting. Anything to get back at the teacher.
Just wait.
I know I could have gone with you. Yes, sir.
You don't consider that turning away from the anger?
What?
Going to do something else than
No,
in a situation making you mad?
No, I don't. I call it awareness. Correct and incorrect, doing and not doing, is a misunderstanding. But this won't work unless you strengthen the awareness so you have the ability to respond. In other words, you're responsible for what you're doing. In other words, doesn't mean blame. That's a misunderstanding. Praise and blame that's the world of samsara. That's the material world where we try to find out who's wrong. Nobody's wrong, nobody's right. This is dependently risen. Anybody who's born into a family of millionaires and anybody who's born into a family of drug addicts, that's a choiceless situation. You don't decide to do that. That so-called decision is dependently risen. It's not a decision. You go, as I say, I've probably said this hundreds of times. You want to see how much control you have? Go look in the mirror. Go manage that. Where did you get this nose? Where do you get these ears? Where do you get this skin color? Where do you get this anything that you see? We didn't consciously anyway decide to do that. There might be something going on in consciousness that shows up as that before you come into manifestation. Probably something, but it's not about thought patterns, and it's not about deciding to. Well, I need to be an iron worker in Philadelphia in the 1940s. It's not that type of thing. That's not. That's for Marvel comics. Did I finish? Good. Did I nail it?
I think so.
Yeah, I didn't nail anything. Yes.
Using that example that Unya brought up, it seems like, especially anger in politics, like people seem to be pretty angry, and that's an area that,
Yeah.
like as much as I look at that, I don't seem to have that reaction to it.
You're not very smart.
So
He's sewing a robe to be a monk, so I can mock him and just write it off as teaching. Go ahead.
So it seems like anger is something I don't really relate with people. Is that something I'm just shutting down on?
How does it look to you, first thought? How does it look to you?
Just doesn't show up.
I guess I haven't worked on you hard enough yet. I'm letting you down. I don't know. As I said earlier, some people don't have that particular dynamic, their way of doing it. You're more of a Buddha family. You're more of a person who shuts down on things. I don't know if it's necessarily anger, but a person who turns away. Correct? I just asked your girlfriend. So, but not, and not like you're doing it like you're deliberately shutting things off. It's just the way your particular wiring works. It's just a matter of continuing to practice, continue to study, continue just doing what you're doing. So you're doing fine. Nothing to correct. You can't really correct ignoring.
Is there some outcome or some kind of resolution that's supposed to happen with, am I supposed to feel more anger like other people or be happy when other people
I didn't say
are?
that. No, just count your blessings. Talk to somebody who gets mad. Talk to me. Anger is difficult. And I'm not saying that what you're dealing with in your situation doesn't have its own difficulty. But no, you don't have to look and see where you're angry or you're covering up anger. This is not psychology. And it has psychological aspects to it, but it's not that. This is why you're not, if you could work with this, seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist, you'd be doing that. And it's not incorrect. It's a totally valid way of working with difficulty in our lives. We do it all the time. Billions of people do that, probably. But you're here doing this, so you're going to do it with a very primary situation, your awareness itself, just the awareness. Sit down, hold still, wake up, find out who you are. Nothing to believe, disbelieve, or ignore. That's what you're doing. If it were a mountain, here's the mountain. Okay, I'm going to take away half of it. There's half of the mountain gone. But you can imagine that because I only have 2 arms. I mean, here you are right here. Just keep going. That's pretty accurate because actually when you get to the top, you fall off. You see how the metaphor works?
I think so. I don't know what you're
Don't
asking.
lie to me.
I don't know what you're asking me.
Sounds good. Further questions?
Would you, or have you applied this same approach to any of the emotions that arise? Some seem more subtle and difficult to see, like depression, for instance, or deep sorrow. How would we work with that?
Just look at it.
Is this the same prescription as with anger?
Well, it's about awareness of, so to use a really strong metaphor, you have the sky, which is your mind, and then you have the clouds, which are your thoughts, your experience, or your what comes and goes. Clouds don't last. It's a very simple metaphor that's used long before I got here. So the idea is to identify more with the sky than you do with the clouds, just relatively speaking. And at some point, and it may be a point, it may not be, at some point the clouds and the sky are not two different things. There isn't anything that is else. There's no else. When that happens, if it's even an occurrence at all, suddenly all the else's that used to be there are really, really in high relief. The separation is even more strong than it was because there's no fear. More?
Is this example that you've given possibly, does this have to do with texture when you speak about texture? Is this something to
So I use the metaphor of texture because texture tends to, when if you just look at the texture of a feeling or an emotion, the concepts might hang around for a while. I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm bad, or I'm good. The judgment, the ideas, and so on. But if you just look at the texture of whatever the experience is, then that textural situation is closer to the emotional dynamic that's happening in one's consciousness. So it's not that the concepts or the ideas or the elaborations or the analysis disappear, but they kind of take a back seat because the texture is, in order to have an understanding of the spaciousness in the difficulty you're having, you have to begin to look at the texture because you can't have texture unless there's space. Just like the simple example is the nap of carpeting. In order to have something that doesn't feel like linoleum, there has to be space between things. So that by looking at the texture, we start to go down into the actual emotional dynamic, even intellectual dynamic of what our experience is, and this tends to dissolve. It starts to lose its polarity of right and wrong, good and bad, up and down, back and forth, texture, no texture, wisdom, delusion. All of those polarities start to be the contrast there seems to go away. At the same time, you're looking at the texture. More?
Are you saying that conventionally all the characteristics of one's emotions will remain, but fundamentally they're blown out of the water? They're not there. They don't matter. They're not important. They come and go. I'm not sure how to say that.
You will be able to say it. It's not a dismissive thing. It's not, well, it doesn't matter anymore. No, it may really, really matter. The intensity could be even stronger. The anger could be even stronger when there's no expression of it. So I just use the idea of texture to help, because it's helped me to take whatever's arising and look at how it go into how it feels rather than try to get out of it and cover it up with judgments, ideas, shouldn't be there, I got to get rid of this, and all of those things. And it's not, you're not validating it, you're not saying it should be there, you're not doing anything with it, you're just not separating yourself from it. How does it feel? You ever petted a cat? I rest my case. It's very similar, except the cat is not a problem. Well, occasionally there are problems. Anything else?
There's something. I guess I'm a little curious of what we're all doing here.
Well, I know what I'm doing here.
What are you doing here?
Sitting here listening to you. What are you doing here?
Same.
Hmm?
Same thing.
Sitting here listening to yourself? Just saying. That's actually a good question. What are we doing here? That's a good question to, when you sit down to meditate. What is this? What am I doing? What is this? Go into it. Yes, Choo-choo.
There's another question from Sanho. He asks, with social politics, how do we hold our seat without becoming part of the problem through passive acceptance or by adding on too much?
Well, Sanho, I think you've said it there totally. Just be aware that there's a tendency to want to go one way or another, just to get rid of or get out of the stress of the whole thing. Stress of being a human being and being in a world where there's so much chaos and confusion and prejudice. So, especially if you take a dose of anything, it doesn't necessarily have to be Fox News. It can be MSNBC, CNN. There's all kinds of confusion anywhere, everywhere. Free speech TV. Anything you look at where somebody's presenting you with their view of how things are, going to be some difficulty there. So, small doses. Put cotton in your ears, and then wear sunglasses, and then watch TV. Well, Sanho wouldn't have to do that, of course. Have a question? No questions?
I asked lots of questions.
Huh? You asked a lot of questions. I should let you off the hook. All right. Any other questions? We're way past bedtime. Are you starting to get mad at me because it's past your bedtime?
I don't get a bedtime anymore.
It's because Yo-Yo's not here to keep you in check.
Yeah, she's not here to give me the thumbs down. Time to quit. Very good. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books.
And donate money. We have a.
Oh yeah, and we have a donation box for money if you'd like to donate right outside the window. Thank you.
May the
This penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho-san shi-shi-fu. Shi-son mu-sa-mo-ko-sa. The three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.